Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt. This is Cutting from the Piece on the 13th of May, 2018. There are different realities. There have always been different realities down through history. George Orwell talked about it in his book 1984. You find that Huxley did the same thing, Aldous Huxley, with his Brave New World. But Orwell had the statement running through his whole book that the proles don't count, where Winston's just hoping that the proles eventually, the proletariats, the ordinary people, would one day figure out what was happening and change it all, because it was obviously wrong. That's a mistake right away, even if he could inform them to believe that they would do something about it. There are different aspects of human nature and how to control human nature and how to motivate human nature. For instance, it's quite easy by an authority to train the public to obey the authority, to encourage them that they have a national government or a nation of their own when it's time to go to war, and use the people to go to war against some other nation or region or whatever they want to call it these days, and plunder their assets on behalf of those who own your country, which is never the people. And they go off and do it very quickly. It's a very basic instinct, which is dragged out of the pit, but unfortunately it's used against the general population, not for them. And they never figure out, generally, that they were even used in the first place. Propaganda is very simple. Those enemy bad, you good, you go fight for us. And it works every time. There are also many ways to divert the people off of even following a basic thread of fact, if they want to. So it's a completely perfect art today, and you can distract them so quickly by different techniques. And for instance, you keep looking at the newspapers and all you get is photographs and scandals to do with Donald Trump, when they want to divert you off what's really happening. The very fact that there's a continuation of the neocon agenda, which also went through the Barack Obama regime as well. It's all regimes. I think when you call other people's regimes, their government's regimes, call what you've got yourself a regime, because that's exactly what it is. It is. You don't know the people that are in power. You get their names and you get smiling photographs and PR shots, but you don't know who they are or what organizations they previously belonged to and who has okayed them to even be in politics, because they are okayed by a much higher authority. And Quigley talked about this. They all belong to the same organization in every country. And every high member of every party, it belongs to the same organization. And that's why the agenda never falters. Never falters. We've been at war so long now, and we forget it because we're not exhausted like World War I or II. We were on heavy rations and so on. They've got it so figured out with the con job of Maynard Keynes and the new form of currency manipulation that they can keep disinflating the currency and inflating the currency. And they have every other country bailing out every other country and also borrowing from the World Bank and the Bank for International Settlements to manage it all. But your currency is getting worth less and less and less all the time if you haven't noticed. Eventually you'll need barrel loads of it to go and get your favourite latte, as they for some reason like to call it these days. But we truly are so, it's magically manipulated today in different realities. Russell talked about it, many others have talked about it. Those who are governed and lead are given a completely different reality growing up from childhood than the ones who are going to ordinary schools and believing in their indoctrinations. Can you imagine getting up in the morning and knowing exactly what you're going to do that day and what your whole world agenda is, and you don't even take notes of what's given out as news because it's so far down beneath you. It's meant for the proles, as Orwell would say, at the bottom. It's to keep them in ignorance, not to give them any knowledge to wake them up, but to keep them in ignorance. That's what it's for. Because reality is vastly different. In the last few weeks I've been going through just some of the organizations, there are countless organizations of this multi-layered non-governmental organizational system, all working on behalf of those who own the planet. And the government simply is there to rubber stamp the recommendations and the plans and agendas that are set out for them to implement. That's truly the way it is. Remember in 2006, I think it was, I played over the air, and it was shortwave worldwide at that time, and some internet too, and it was to do with the North American Free Trade Agreement, the final, because they keep updating it, you see. And you had the three amigos, the three presidents of three main countries, prime ministers and presidents, always getting together every year to integrate the next step and the next step and the next, up until 2005, I think it was, because that was supposed to be one of the great final steps, not the completely last one, but great final steps to implement it all. And the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, came out on television in Canada, openly, as themselves at the time, a private organisation which is just a branch of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the other big private branch in Britain. And they were ecstatic about the fact they were bringing in a form of governance for the whole of the Americas, based on the same system, they hoped, as the European Parliament, which they admitted their organisations over there had set up too. Remember, you're not voting for these people. They're private. But that's the real system that runs the world. To be anybody in the world, you have to belong to it. And to belong to it, you must be asked to belong to it. In other words, if they need you or could use you, you'll be asked. If they don't trust you or you can't be used for something, you'll not be asked. The system that it runs in is called the Chatham House Rules. One story for the public, if you ever ask questions, and one story amongst yourselves. Very secretive. And it was always for world government, because Lord Bertrand Russell and all these characters were members of it, going all the way back to Lord Alfred Milner, who we know at that time he was in charge of, for quite a long time, the ultimate phase of it, for bringing in global governance under a British system. Eventually it was to be passed on to the States, which they did, and the States has been the battering ram and the big gopher to implement this system. And you'll probably go on forever being distracted by liars. There's lots of liars out there who know darn well who you're really working for in this world, and who's behind it all at the very, very top. Other ones will go on about this strange, this vague, this mysterious globalists, they call it mysterious globalists, or Illuminati, you know, and so on. And it's not hard to find out who wags the whole dog's body across the planet, because every country is just a dog getting wagged at the moment. But the US at the moment does supply the military and the financial system through taxation of a massive population, although they're getting bankrupt, of course, with the money they owe. And once they've completed their job, they will have the plug pulled on them, like every other nation's had in the past too. It's rather sad, isn't it? Isn't it so sad? But I remember reading a long, long time ago different books on studies of ancient civilizations, including the ones of the Roman observers of Britain, for instance, early Britain. And you had other ones who worked for and wrote about they always studied the people. If you want to conquer people, you must study them. Today we use anthropologists, literally. They go in with the military and study your target areas to advise on culture and how to strike them or change them or manipulate them or even depress them so they won't fight back. Psychological warfare. Very important field. Military also has incredible listening centers across the whole planet that takes in all data electronic. After going into war or the Arab War, they constantly monitor all the chatter going back and forth, all kinds of communications. And of course they're doing it with all the populations of the world, even their domestic populations too. They've been doing it for years. And yet they send people off to fight to keep freedom, which is ridiculous. And folk can't even figure that one out. What kind of freedom are we talking about here? Going to pass on the same ultra-high monitoring of everything you do, say, and so on to other people and make sure that they use it? Well, nothing changes. Nothing changes, does it? Because in ancient times, getting back to Rome and Britain and so on, I think it was Tacitus wrote stories about Britain and how the people were. But he found out, and the Romans had to use these techniques just like they do today. All countries do the same thing today in warfare and so on, or taking over countries. You can find out dissensions amongst different little groups, and they can be very slight, but then you exacerbate them, and then you have them splitting off. Then you fund different ones, or even fund them all, and have them fight each other. That still goes on today. The same thing happens within our countries too, of course. But getting back to Tacitus, he says it's quite easy to buy off certain people. Nothing changes. And that's why no country truly has a complete solid nation today. Well, almost. But every other country has so many dissensions. And it's no different than politics. Politics is just a substitute for open fighting, for power play. And Carl Quigley said for the CFR, he says that they supply all the leaders they're all pre-selected before you vote for them, or think that you vote for them, and they've already sworn allegiance to the big agenda of the Council on Foreign Relations, or Royal Entry for International Affairs. Now they also have one for the whole of Europe, and the politicians there, European Council on Foreign Relations, private organisation. And that's why the agenda always sails ahead. And it goes all the way back. You'll find it, yes, you will definitely find it with different Freemasonic groups going way back into the 1500s at least. And with those who controlled the money, even today, same thing. This is a connecting factor amongst all of this structural system of who's on board, who benefits, who gets extra privileges, who gets to know a little bit more, and who gets ahead in life. Very, very prevalent still today, by the way. Ask anybody who's taken the cash and played the game. You might know some. And it's rather sad, isn't it, that you wait to be told rather than rely on your instinct. Your instincts are your first line of defense. If something smells wrong, it is wrong, at least for you. And when you know there's something going on with people, why do you fall right back into supporting them when you forget they've just done the dirt in you all before, and then again and again? It keeps happening. Shame on you. You should know better, shouldn't you? But we're living in an age today of massive deception, and everything you look at, as I've said before, everywhere you look for even help has generally been compromised or even put up in advance, because if you have so many different personality types with little variations of what they want to do to change the world, or even you stop the changes or whatever it happens to be, you've got ready-made suits out there for you to step into. This one organization runs all of this and you don't even know it. That's how it's done. That's how it's done from those who walk between the darkness and the light, the black and the white, the tesserated floor, etc. They know what to do. That's how you run the world. And those who do it are well rewarded and given extra freebies you'll never even hear about, to do with better and more in-depth health care that gives you a bit of life extension, in fact, for that matter. I've also mentioned in talks that the Rockefeller Foundation and the brothers, way back, as far back as the 30s, in fact, 1930s, the whole group behind it all, planned and did studies to plan how many newspapers and magazines they'd need to own and control to standardize public opinion. And they worked out, again, naturally, around the 33 number. And they stuck to it too. They took actually more eventually, but they had select areas for categories of different kind of people, different classes of people and professional people, including their own bureaucracies for government. Different magazines were put out for them too, to standardize their opinion. And the pros at the bottom, through their kind of more lowly sports type oriented Newspapers would get the prose stuff, the very simple stuff. And for women too, you'd have lots of stories on romance, blah, 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 fashion, and so, etc., etc. Hasn't changed to this day. But the whole point is not to let you know what's really happening. That's the last thing. That's what's there for, to make sure you don't. But standardizing public opinion on, and all the rags would do that, still do, at the same time when they're on board an agenda together. Have you noticed that there's no condemnation on mainstream, but it was still called mainstream media across the Western world against the wars now? It just stopped. As though it never existed. And not talk about everything else except what's happening now with Israel and Syria and Iran. Again, part of the neocon agenda. And no one wants to talk about it. And you think that's just because what? Because they haven't noticed or something? Are you kidding? It's just amazing. But that's what you do. Because the purpose is also not to inform you of anything that really matters. It's also to persuade you to behave and think in a certain way and what to believe. That's the standardization of opinion. And they want to keep you dumb and stupid and believing in falsehoods. That's what they do. And it's worse than ever today. Because they don't even go out to even find even basic little stories, even local ones. It's all done on the internet, and they just pick up stories that are put out, handouts actually by corporations, by governments that hand out just here, print this, and they're happy to get fill up space for nothing. And they'll do it. Corporations, pharmacology, they stick out stuff all the time in them too. And those who control the agri-food business, they have lots of farming magazines out there, generally owned and run by the corporations who own the farm equipment and the chemical industry that runs it as well, for pesticides and herbicides, etc. And so everything is controlled to keep you in the dark, stupid and very obedient, and to pay for all these wars of conquest, etc. And not to protest it, to give you other things to worry about at home. And you'll find, for instance, have you ever noticed all these so-called anti-fascists? Where are they when it comes to your own country fomenting and paying for war across the planet, sometimes for other people? I mean, where's the objections? Have you noticed it's not there? Well, that's enough to question it, isn't it? And it's also for those who are involved in the bottom of it level or thinking of joining it. Maybe you should think about that before you do. Because surely, if you see injustice anywhere, you would think you would all be out there to condemn it, but you're not, are you? Not at all. Interesting. And it's a sad thing that folk can't think for themselves. They want to join and belong in some uniform thing. Very interesting, that in itself. That's a whole separate part of it too. Uniformity of people. And protesters. There's so many different groups, for instance, before the Russian Revolution, of anarchists and all the divisions of anarchists, kept changing the meanings of it, and they had different divisions and types of them and so on. And until the anarchists, that generally, they used to be literally loners at one time, formed groups themselves of anarchists, which was kind of throwing their function out the window when you actually belong to a group with a common cause, you see. But before the Russian Revolution, or even into the Russian Revolution, you still had different groups all vying for their version of power. Very much like you found in The Life of Brian and Monty Python. Monty Python, for all the mayhem in it, and they're bashing, of course, at Christianity, which was pretty common. Again, to get ahead in life, you've got to do that in today's system. You've got to bash Christianity, as it must be. Because there's powers that control things, you know. But they did come out with an awful lot of good stuff as well. They would show you how the systems worked. And different good comedy skits with, for instance, the different People's Republic or protesters for Israel. This is set in ancient Israel, supposedly. in Life of Brian, and then they'd have arguments with the ones across the way, which was just a different definition of the same thing, but with words, it's the same words actually, but a different order. The People's Army for blah, blah, blah. Nothing changes. Nothing changes. And it's awfully interesting too, all the different groups down through time who belong to different groups are used and then wrung out, dried, and often thrown to the wolves once their time is up. So never be a follower, especially to walk into a pre-made, I call it pre-made shops, like suits, whatever flavor of anarchy or protest you have. As I say, there's a division already made for you with a ready-made suit to walk into. Just step into here. Does that fit you? One size fits all, and away you go. And if you don't like it, you can go to the next one, the slightly different colour, and try them. It's the same with religion too. I mean, people now shop for religions. They're so bored. And what they shop for, really, and the controllers know it so well, is something that gives no rules. And, well, who's going to speak out against that? Well, there's no rules in this one. There's no punishments for anything. There's no right or wrong. You just, and that's the way you go. Quite something, eh? I can remember there was a woman at the United Nations giving a talk in some meeting. It was printed in a newspaper, and she explained why a certain group over in the Middle East, or Muslims or whatever, who were getting bombed at that time, we're always bombing folk around the Middle East, but she said that they deserved it because, you see, and not to worry about it or feel bad about it. And she was a New Ager. She said, you see, it was their karma. And she said, their karma demanded to get this punishment. I mean, here they are getting cluster bombs. Probably it was Iraq, dropped on you, blown up everything. But she rationalised it by saying that, well, because they're paying for what they did in previous lives. I thought, my God, do you understand the madness of this when folks start to believe this? There's nothing to stop them doing it to you down the road, using the same excuse, is there? And you think I'm kidding? I'm not kidding at all. The people who've planned these perpetual wars and all the plunder that they're going to get out of it for themselves, not for you. You'll do it all and pay for it all through your taxes and bankruptcies. But do you realise they don't see you, the peasant, any differently than the people that they're slaughtering over whoever over there happens to be? Those songs over there. They love these songs over there. It's never back home. But eventually the eating machine comes back home, and the people who are running it, these wars, don't see you any differently than any peasant that they're blowing up anywhere else. Don't forget that for an instant. And when such incredible movements are underway of warfare, and I've given talks about this before too, don't forget the warfare has many different consequences. It also has massive changes on all sides that are in the conflict. And there are big plans which they need war to make these plans actually happen. Don't forget, again, Quigley, who taught many members of the State Department in the techniques of so-called diplomacy, when it's already a plan, your diplomacy to them is a plan. It's how to get what you want from an enemy or an opponent. And he said you can get more done in 5 years of war on a social level, as changes, taking rights away and all this kind of stuff, than you can using propaganda and persuasion and 50 years of peace. So they love war. And don't forget what the big agenda is too. You've already seen part of it laid out. Europe will never be the same again, never. So it's used as a weapon against Europe too. Don't forget that. And now with this one, if they go ahead with this whole of Syria and then Iran at the same time, and people will get out of Iran knowing they're going to get demolished. It might take a few years, it might not, it may be very quick, but they're going to get out. And then you're going to get the different groups that Saudi Arabia is bombing away at. You're going to get maybe 10 times as many rushing out. this time into Europe and North America, to change the whole system forever. And that's part of the plan too. So don't blame the people that you'll see doing it. Blame the ones who planned all this to happen. Because they'll never let you into their big secret. Never. Never, never. And all those who pretend they're part of you as media of one kind or another, I stress again, it's meant to persuade you to go along with it all, under the guise that they're actually, no one's fighting this, no one's fighting it at all. They're telling you to go along with it and who you support. That's the giveaway and all. And you can't still get that past you as well. Right? You're being told and persuaded, and that's what audiences are for, and that's what the audiences of media are for as well, to be persuaded to go along with their master's bidding. Who to hate, who's the good guy, even though that's generally a lie, and opposite is often the fact. But for you, there'll be no good guys eventually. The fallout will do us all in. It's intentional. Completely intentional. And it took years to prepare for the neocons to get right back in again openly as themselves. Because they knew when they got Bush Jr. in, from the beginning, this is how long-term the plan is, they knew they would give themselves such a bad name with their wars. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and so on. And other ones as well, by the way. That they wouldn't get openly voted back. So they came in with what you might call a camouflaged horse, you might say. A Trojan horse. Very clever, eh? And even worked out the main media end of it that would bring it in. Again, a deception, using people. See, you're always being used as big blocks to vote and support. You're always getting used. And unfortunately, it's so slick today, most folk can't get over it. They don't want to admit they were wrong. They don't want to admit they're still getting used. And the suicidal ones will jump on board and stay on board, even when they know they're wrong, and be part of the problem. Because we pay for it all. Everything has consequences. Everything has consequences. And no one will ever ask openly why America's across the world fighting these wars and starting them and funding them, even funding the supposed rebel armies in the first place. Isn't that the most important part of it? I know it's too, put some links up, that the big military-industrial complex boys are in all the business magazines with their shares shooting up again. They're on a roll. And Raytheon and all these different companies just, on a roll. They can see it. They foresee a possibility of a few years of massive profits here.